Okay, now that we've gone over the basic controls of a compressor, we will go ahead and start playing back this snare drum, and we'll put in a compressor, we'll change some parameters, we'll turn it off, and we'll hear the differences that it's making. This is no compression. What we're gonna be listening for is that very first part of that hit. So you see how that deadened down a little bit? We're getting a pretty heavy gain reduction here. We're only on a 3-to-1 ratio. Turn it off. So you can hear how when we have that compressor in, we're making that initial transient on the snare drum a bit softer. So now let's try changing that attack time. So you hear that transient come back in. So now we aren't compressing that initial hit, we're compressing the body of the snare after the hit. So you can also see how when we did that, our compressor gain reduction went down drastically. We're not getting as much gain reduction since the attack time was so high. Play it again. Bring it down way low. Now we're missing everything. Now it's too fast. As soon as that hits, we're compressing everything all the way down. So we're missing the whole attack of the snare. Somewhere right in this range is going to be the best. We still get the initial attack of the snare, but it's not making your ears bleed. In, out. In, out. So the other thing we don't want to do is increase the volume too much or decrease the volume. Over here, we have an output control, and we can add makeup gain to this plugin after the compression. So we are adding 4.2 dBs after the compression because when we're compressing, we're bringing that volume down. So if I bring it back down to 0 and we play with it out, in, you can see how much quieter that is. But we don't want to lose all the volume. So we're going to bring it up about the amount that we're compressing down. And a good way to know how much you need, turn it on, hear it, turn it off, hear it, make sure they sound similar. And that is a basic compressor. I'm not going to get into any of the more technical side of it because this is a basics video, but we will be going through a lot more different compressors. This is a CLA 76. It is a model of the 1176 compressor, and it looks way different. These are analog compressor models. It looks like it did back when everything was analog. We have actual dials here and VU meters instead of everything being digital. This is a FET style. There are going to be a bunch of different types of compressors that we're going to talk about, and we can go more in depth in those later on. But for right now, just know it's an FET style. There are 2 different revisions of this compressor that they have modeled, the Blackie version and the Bluey version. They're literally models of 2 different versions of this 1176 compressor, and each one has their own different type of characteristics. So on the Blackie version, we have our input and our output. Now, instead of having a threshold like we're used to, the input drives the amount of compression. So the more input we have, the more compression. And then our output is our makeup gain. Our attack is also different. We just have a dial here, and the numbers do not correspond with 1 through 7. On this model of compressor, 1 is actually the slowest attack time, and 7 is the fastest attack time, all the way down to 50 microseconds. And 1 is 1 millisecond. So it is a fast compressor. So remember, on our last compressor, we were at 12 milliseconds for our attack time. Here we have 1 millisecond or 50 microseconds. And then it is the same way with the release, where 1 is the slowest, 7 is the fastest, and we have 50 microseconds all the way up to 1 second. So we'll set these guys just right in there for now. And then we have our ratio. We have a 4-to-1, an 8-to-1, a 12-to-1, and then a 20-to-1. Again, when you're getting into these higher numbers, you're more into limiting than compressing. And then you also have this all button, which adds distortion and harmonics into your compressor. So it is a very interesting option that you have. So we'll start with 4, start right in here and see how it sounds. So no compression. So you can see how slow that's coming back after you go under your threshold. So let's try and speed up our release a little bit. There we go. Turn it off. Turn it on. And if we wanted to, we could bring this up and get more compression. So you see now we're hitting that -7. Try and go for like 3 or 4. We don't want to get too crazy. It all depends on what you're trying to do, but normally we're looking for like that 3 to 5 dBs of compression. Unless you're trying to go for something drastic, then you can go higher, but 3 to 5 is a good starting point. Bring it down just a bit. Bring this up so we get our volume back. Need a little bit more. There we go. We'll go really fast on our attack. Really fast on the release. So you can hear that transient disappear there. Versus. So that is the CLA 76 Blackie. Now let's switch over to the Bluey version and let's see how that one sounds. So no compression. Lot more compression we're getting over here. We're going to turn this down. Try and get a little less compression out of it, and we'll give it some more gain on the output. Go to 8-to-1. Now we're clipping. Turn it off. So that is the 1176. Now we're going to move over to the LA2A. This is a tube style compressor. Again, it is modeled after an actual analog compressor, so hardware gear. As you can see, we have a lot less controls on this one. We have a compress or limit, we have gain, we have peak reduction, and we have mix, trim, and then the special high frequency knob that we will get to in a second. We also have analog sound. I also had that on this one, and it's representing the hum that you would have on an actual analog gear. So you can turn that on or off to taste. So on the LA2A, we have our input gain and then peak reduction. So if our peak reduction is at 0, we're not going to have any compression whatsoever, and we are only putting through the audio source. So no compression. Going in, and let's match. Down just a little bit. 32. Okay. And we'll turn on our 60 hertz. So you can hear the noise coming through. 50 hertz. It's analog noise. Now that we have our levels matched up between the input and our original, and our compressor is activated, we will now start to make some peak reduction. Thing to know on this compressor, you don't have your ratio, you don't have attack time, you don't have a release time. All that is automated. The ratio is a 3-to-1 ratio. The attack time is approximately 10 milliseconds. And the release time is variable release based on the signal source volume. So it will change depending on how loud or quiet your signal source is. No compression whatsoever. We're on the gain reduction display. We move it over to input. We can see the input and the output. Gain reduction, none. Hear how quiet we are. So we're going to give us a little bit of gain. Pretty close. A hair more. Pretty good. So now we're getting about 3 dBs of gain reduction. And we're trimming us up on the output to give us that volume back. And no compression right now. So you can hear there's some small differences going on. Okay, and now we have an LA3A, which is a solid state compressor. Again, we have our input gain, we have our peak reduction, compressor limiter, mix, trim, high frequency, analog, in, out, gain reduction. It's a lot like the LA2A, but remember the LA2A is a tube style compressor, where the LA3A is a solid state compressor, so it's using different components to compress. So let's go ahead and hear the raw. And with compression. No compression. Compression. With noise. Without noise. More compression. You can see as you drive these ones, we're getting rid of that transient more and more. That initial hit. And it brings up the ring. Hear that ring at the end? Because because when that compressor hits and we're lifting up that sound coming back up, we're squeezing down that dynamic range and bringing everything closer together. And now we have an API 2500 compressor. So we have our threshold, attack in milliseconds, ratio, and release. We also have a variable release on this one as well. Then we have a couple new things, a thrust detector. We'll get to that with the tone shaping. And then we have a knee again, like we did in the Emo D5. So we can hear before and after. And again, with these compressors, since we're modeling analog gear, they're gonna be slightly different than what's going on in your normal stock compressor. There's different nuances depending on which actual compressor they modeled. So we go back in. For thrust, normal is no filter whatsoever for the tone shaping. Medium is slight attenuation of the lows and a slight boost in the highs. And then loud, it's a linear filter, boosting the highs, decreasing low end pumping, while increasing high frequency compression. So we're getting more compression on the highs than we are on the lows. It's a much deeper sound. In our soft knee, we get a lot more compression. Because again, with the soft knee, you're saying that the compression can start happening down here. It doesn't have to wait until it's all the way up here. Which again, it might not look like a drastic difference, but it definitely can be. And then we have the tone type. This is kind of like how they're routing the compressor through. Okay, now we have the SSL EV2 channel, and our dynamic section is right here. We have our ratio, our release, and our threshold. We also have a fast attack switch that we can hit. Slow attack is auto sensing. Fast attack is 1 millisecond. And then we have from 0.1 milliseconds all the way up to 4 seconds for our release time. We have our threshold right here. And we have a 1-to-1 to infinity to 1. Again, once you get over about that 20-ish range, you're really into limiting more than compression. So the default routing for the EV2 channel is once the audio comes in, it goes through the compressor. Then it goes through the filter, then it goes through the EQ, and then it goes out. We can change that by clicking in the channel out and split, which then brings us in through the filter first, then the EQ, then the compressor, and then out. Or if we just do split, we get filter, then compressor, then EQ. So it all depends on what you're trying to achieve and what sounds best to you. You can compress before you EQ, you can compress after you EQ, you can compress before your filters, you can compress after your filters. If you're gonna be putting a low cut on the channel that you're compressing, I would highly recommend you compress after that low cut so that those low frequencies are not affecting your compressor. So if you have boominess coming through that mic, that compressor will act faster than normal because it's picking up those low frequencies. So if you turn on this split and turn up that high pass filter, then your compressor isn't sensing anything underneath those frequencies that you're cutting out. We can hear before, after, fast attack, see how drastic that is, slow attack, letting those transients still come through, while not being as drastic. We can change our ratio, which will change how many dBs we're compressing. We can also change the threshold, less compression, more compression. And that is the basics of the EV2. Okay, so this is the KRAMER Pi, another analog modeled compressor. It is a solid state unit as well, just like the LA3A was. And the controls for this is you have your threshold, you have your output gain, you have your decay time or your release time, and then we have our compression ratio from 1:1 all the way to limit. 1:1, 2:1, 3:1, 5:1. So you have less options, but you have different ratios that you can use. The attack time is fixed. For the compressor side, it is 0.5 milliseconds. For the limiter side, it is 1 millisecond. And then the release time is times 100 milliseconds. So 100 milliseconds all the way up to 3200 milliseconds. And let's go ahead and hear what it sounds like. That sounds really nice. Probably give it a little bit more output volume. But you can hear how it's getting rid of that initial attack and softening up that hit while still being really nice and full. Out. In. This one again has the analog noise, or you can turn it off. So that is the KRAMER Pi. Next one is the RCOMP, very old compressor, one of the originals from Waves. So this is what it used to look like, and they put some new skins on it so we can see modern times. Threshold on this side, ratio right here, so as we raise or lower, we change that ratio. Makeup gain at the end here. Attack time, release time. ARC stands for auto release control. You also have manual, so you can manually change the release time. We have an opto or an electro. The electro has a faster release as the signal drops back under the threshold, where the opto has a slower release as the signal goes back under the threshold. And then we have a smooth and a warm setting. So the smooth setting adds nothing to the signal. The warm adds low frequency harmonics and adds more compression to the higher frequencies than the lower frequencies. So we can hear all that together. We also have a mix knob. A few of the other ones also have a mix knob, and it basically, you can add a little bit of the compressor in, but not too much, or have it all the way in. And we'll play around with that on this one. No compression. Compression. Smooth. Back to no compression. So you can hear those differences as we change around the settings. Next, we have a DBX 160. We have our threshold. We have our compression, our ratio, which is a 1:1 to infinity to 1. We have output gain. We have what our meter is metering. We have mix, input, noise level, and then we also have this high pass side chain, which we'll get to in a second. No compression. Compression. Just to point out, it looks like this meter is not moving nearly as much, but you can see that this one is -10, which means this is -5. So we are actually hitting that -5. Just something to be aware of while you're looking at the compressor itself. Now let's turn on this high pass sidechain. So what the high pass sidechain does is it's applying less compression to frequencies under 90 hertz. Kick drums, bass guitars, really cool thing that you can add in. Can't really hear it too much on this snare drum, unfortunately. We can keep going with noise. So you can hear. Mix knob, no compression. 50%, 100%. And we can probably bring this output up a little bit. We can add more compression, higher ratio, more compression. So now we're on the PUIGCHILD 660, which is the mono version of the PUIGCHILD 670, which is a model of the Fairchild 670. And the PUIGCHILD 660 is the left channel modeled after the Fairchild 670. And as you can see here, we're back to those limited controls where we have input, threshold, time constant, which is your attack and release, and then output gain. Let me just read you what these are. So 1 is 0.2 millisecond attack, 300 millisecond release. 2, 0.2 millisecond attack, 800 millisecond release. 3, 0.4 millisecond attack, 2-second release. 4, 0.4 millisecond attack, 5-second release. 5, 0.4 millisecond attack, auto release, 2-second for individual peak, 10-second for multiple peak, and 6, 0.2 millisecond attack, 0.8 millisecond for individual peak, 10-second for multiple peak, and 25-second for consistent loud level. So we'll start at 1, and we'll play around with it and see how they sound. No compression. Compression. That's 1, 2, 3. You can see how it slows down. You can see on that one how we're still at -1 when that next hit comes. So we're already compressing by the time that next hit activates. So that's what we don't want to do. 4, 5, 6. 1. I think for this instance, 2 is okay. And off. The last 2 compressors we're going to get into, which are bus compressors. When they were modeled, they were at the very end of the chain at the output side of all of your mix coming through. Now we get to add them onto individual tracks, whole tracks, anything we want. This is the SSL-G master bus, which was on the SSL 4000 console. We have threshold, attack, ratio, makeup gain, release, a mix knob, a trim knob, and then a rate knob for the fade off. And I'll show you what that sounds like. In a live situation, you would not use this. In a recording situation, you can probably find some pretty cool areas to use it. We also have an analog on and off. Our attack time is from 0.1 milliseconds up to 30 milliseconds. Our ratio is 2, 4, and 10. And our release is 0.1 to 1.2 with also an auto release time. No compression. Compression. And then your fade off. Just fades out the audio. Analog noise. Mix. Faster attack. That's the SSL G-Bus. And last but not least is the VCOMP from Waves. It is a Neve model compressor off of the 2254 master bus compressor. So we have input, output, ratio, and release. We also have a fast attack at 1 microsecond or a slow attack at 1 millisecond. We also have a limiter, but we're not going to dive into that right now. Your input, again, is going to drive your threshold, how much compression is being applied. So we can go ahead. Fast. Drive that input. Bring down our output. Getting more compression. 4 to 1. 2 to 1. No compression. Compression. So now we're going to see what each one sounds like. Starting off, no compression. Emo D5. No compression. CLA 76. No compression. LA2A. No compression. LA3A. No compression. API 2500. No compression. EV2. No compression. KRAMER Pi. No compression. RCOMP. No compression. DBX 160. No compression. PUIGCHILD. No compression. SSL comp. No compression. VCOMP. So as you can tell, each compressor sounded different. And I think that's the beautiful thing about modeling analog gear is depending on the manufacturer and what was available at the time, there is a different tone and a different sound that each compressor makes. So now we are going to hop into a couple live soundboards and show you how you can utilize these compressors on a live desk. So the first thing we're going to hop into is a Behringer X32. And if we hop over to the dynamic section, we see that we have a compressor with a couple different knees from soft to sharp. We have a threshold, we have our ratio, our mix knob, our gain, our attack, and our release. And here you actually have a really cool visual after it comes back underneath the threshold, how it is releasing. And same thing with the attack. So they give you some nice visuals with that. Another thing you have is in your effects, you can actually add in an 1176 compressor. So you have the same control and functionality that we had earlier with the attack times, release times, input and output. You also have a couple different ones. The Leisure compressor is an LA2A, and then they also had a Fairchild model as well. So you have those built right into the Behringer X32. And then here we have the same thing on the Allen and Heath AVANTIS, where we have ratio, threshold, gain, release, and attack time. And you also have a soft knee or a hard knee. This one is very evident on what I was talking about with when you have a softer knee, you can start compression earlier than with a hard knee. So you can see all the way up here is where the compressor's set. But when you turn on the soft knee, it goes all the way down to there. So you're getting compression earlier than you normally would with a hard knee. And then we also have in the library different compressors that we can recall. Now you have an LA2A style compressor. We have an opto compressor, and we have a 1176 style compressor. Go over to the DM3 in Dynamics 2. We have our threshold, our ratio, attack, release, and makeup gain right here, ready to go. And as well on the Allen and Heath SQ series, we go into compressor. We have a hard knee, soft knee. Here you can see too, this is where we're actually starting our compression versus way up here with the hard knee. Ratio, threshold, gain, in and out button, attack, release, and they have different types of compressors that you can load in, all ready to go, built into the board. As always, last but not least, in LV1, you can load up all the plugins directly onto your channel and have all of the different compressors right there at your fingertips. Thank you so much for watching this video. Leave a comment down below what your favorite compressor is and what compressor you like the most on this snare drum. As always, all the plugins we use today are linked down in the description. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on future audio mixing videos.